The significance of the difference between these two types of worldviews, the scientific skeptic and the conspiracy theorist, when it comes to their ability to successfully evaluate what's true about reality and what isn't, cannot be overstated. Now, when a new claim is presented, the first thing to do is an initial assessment. It's important to ensure that we have a proper understanding of the claim being made, what its scope is, and what the implications of it are, were it to be true. We then want to do a cursory check on the source of the information. Is it a comment from a friend, a random person on Twitter, some content creator that we might respect, a mainstream news outlet, maybe an underground news outlet, a presidential candidate, a foreign government? If the source of information is one that you don't trust, perhaps they're notoriously unreliable, then it might make sense to reject the claim. Now, the important part to remember here is that our rejection of the claim is tentative. We should always be open to revisiting the claim again in the future, should additional sources of information crop up or more evidence get presented. Now, if the source is generally unknown to you or is from one that's at least trustworthy enough to consider, then we should be considering the plausibility of the claim in question. Is the claim an extraordinary one? Something that, if true, would require a major paradigm shift in our understanding of the universe, or would be a major discovery that has life-changing implications? If we're talking about someone claiming that they invented a free energy machine, that they cured cancer, or were met by aliens last night, chances are you're safe to reject these claims for now. If any of these claims were actually true, then chances are it would come across your radar again and you could reevaluate. If we're talking about a major breakthrough in science coming out of something like a university's research lab, then we should perhaps take it a bit more seriously. If we're talking about a claim that, if true, would cause somebody to lose their job, break up a marriage, or get sent to prison, then we're likely going to need to be very careful about how we proceed with this as well. We should be considering both the plausibility of the claim and the source together within the context to make this determination. Either way, if we haven't outright rejected the claim yet, after we evaluate what the relevance and impact of the claim is, then we can determine if it's worth investing more time into or not, and if so, we can move on to the evaluation phase. Now, our next step should be to evaluate the reliability, quality, and reputation of the source of the claim. We need to be sure to be on the lookout for any biases, conflict of interest, or anything else that would call into question their credibility. We should be aiming to collect as much evidence as possible from as many different, reliable, independent sources as possible, individually assessing each piece of evidence in tandem with the reliability of the source on its own merit. Now, if we find the evidence both compelling and proportional to the claim itself, extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence, then we can move on to the final phase, the critical analysis and peer review. Now, once again, we can consider how this claim fits into our understanding of the world in light of the evidence that we've just considered. What are the implications? We'll want to compare what our assessment is of the evidence to what the experts in the relevant field are saying. We shouldn't just blindly accept what the experts say or what consensus is. Experts are capable of being right, they're capable of being wrong, they're capable of lying, and everything in between. So obviously this needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But generally, respect should be given to professionals and experts within each discipline, and if your personal assessment happens to disagree with that of the consensus of the experts, the fact of the matter is it's simply far more likely that you've gone wrong somewhere along the way. It's certainly not impossible that you've got it right and they're all wrong. Stranger things have happened. So don't necessarily always eliminate this as a possibility. Just remember that the ones that are most likely to be making the paradigm-shifting discoveries are not from random people outside of each discipline, they're from the dissenting opinions working from within them. Now, if you come across such a case, then that needs to be critically analyzed separately. Now, very often what these cases end up being are the cranks on the fringes of these fields. The ones that aren't highly regarded in their communities, not really taken seriously, aren't publishing research, or are introducing pseudoscience into the mix. It really does take a special set of skills and a slightly deeper understanding of these fields to be able to discern the genius from the quack. And throughout history, we've seen a number of geniuses who have perhaps dipped their toes into some quackery at times, but just remember that these are the exceptions, not the rules. Now, I'm not sure if this is the software engineer in me showing or not, but I always like to do a final sanity check before I finish this kind of process. I run my conclusions past some folks I respect, especially ones that are willing to be critical, disagree, or play devil's advocate. I'll spot check the latest polls or headlines or journals to gauge where the general wind seems to be blowing on such a claim, and take everything into consideration along with all of the evidence I was able to gather, and then decide if there's a preponderance of evidence. Given what you know now, do you believe that it's more likely than not that the claim is true? If so, then you're probably justified in believing the claim to be true for now, until more information and evidence becomes available. And again, remember, our conclusions are always tentative. You should always be ready and willing to have your mind changed, but just be sure that the evidence is proportionate to the claim. Now, the way that conspiracy theorists operate is quite different. Let's put ourselves in their shoes and walk through the thought process. When a new claim is presented to us, the first thing we need to do is determine if it confirms or contradicts our existing worldview, because we're going to need to have different standards for handling each type of claim. The opposition are sneaky little snakes and deserve their own special treatment. Now, if the claim confirms our worldview, let's take a look and see if there's any evidence presented along with the claim. Now, if not, that's an obvious demonstration that there's some kind of cover-up going on and is exactly what we'd expect. They will do everything they can to prevent us from gathering and sharing our evidence, although sometimes we're able to get some. And of course, when there is some, there's really no need for us to look at it. I mean, I'm sure it's airtight, right? We already know the claim is true. Of course, given that we know the truth already, we can move on to accepting this unquestioningly. And at the same time, given that this claim is obviously going to be opposing the official narrative or the established consensus, the fact that we know it's true confirms that they're all liars and we've been right all along about everything else. Now, as for claims that contradict our worldview, the first thing we need to do is determine if there's any evidence presented. Because if there is, it's of course fake. Because how could it be real when we know the claim is untrue? Now, naturally, it follows that fabricated evidence is more proof that they are lying to us, which also happens to be the case if there's no evidence presented to us at all along with the claim. Either way, they're lying. Now, next, we need to examine the source of the claim, because we need to know who to blame. In the rare event that the claim is coming from one of us, someone who was a trusted member of our community at one point before, then they must have been compromised. They've either been bought and paid for, this is some kind of PSYOP disinformation campaign, or they're now controlled opposition. We're probably going to want to ostracize them from our community, given, of course, that they're one of them now. So now we want to see if they happen to be one of the types of people that we for sure don't trust. Are they Zionists? Well, then obviously they're lying. That's what they do, right? Do they work for the government or know anybody who was ever even loosely related to a Freemason? Obviously they're in on it. Are they somebody with credentials or a college degree in any science or engineering field? In that case, they're either in on it or they were brainwashed by academia and don't even realize it. Now, if they aren't in any of those groups that we know of, then that means they probably are a globalist, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink. Either way, we of course knew from the start that this claim was untrue. So we're both going to be rejecting it entirely, and also using this to solidify our belief in all of the other conspiracies that we believe in. Now, the crux of this type of worldview is that they assume the conclusion from the start, apply confirmation bias to everything, accepting only what coincides with their existing worldview, and what's even worse is that the process is self-reinforcing. Their acceptance meter only goes in one direction, and if it happens to be the case that their initial judgment about the claim was wrong, there's no way out. There's no error-correcting mechanism. They're stuck in their own internal echo chamber. And in most cases, falling into a conspiratorial state of mind like this is like falling past the event horizon of a black hole. There's really no escaping.